All right. Everybody to the webinar series. Thank you for joining us, and we're going to be starting right now at the top of the hour. This is the Nursing Home Social Work Network, and we are sponsoring this series of webinars made possible through a grant from the Retirement Research Foundation. Ms. Mercedes Byrne-Klug. I'm with the University of Iowa in the School of Social Work, and happy to say that we're here to present our webinar series that's geared toward knowledge building and skill building, specifically targeted toward nursing home social workers, but truly anybody who works or volunteers or lives or has a family member in a nursing home setting can learn from these webinars, because the information applies to nursing and dietitians and others as well. We focus on having social work speakers for some of our topics, and other topics we are deliberately looking for speakers from other disciplines. So if you've heard a good presentation that you think would be good to share with others, please send me that information and I'll contact that speaker and see if there might be a way for us to develop a webinar with that person. We are particularly interested in NHSWs who would like to be sharing a case from the nursing home setting, something that they've worked on themselves, and presenting that case as part of one of our webinars. So if you have a bachelor's degree in social work and you work in a nursing home and you'd like to have us coach you on how to develop a case, we'd love to hear from you. Starting in 2014, we are emailing certificates of attendance to people who are part of the live webinar. So we have, as you know, when you registered, you gave us your email and your name and all that. So we'll be making certificates of attendance for each of you and then just sending them, emailing them to you. Like a hard copy certificate of attendance that is signed, personally signed, then we are asking for a check for $20, and I'll put all that information on the website just to have it processed and mailed and all that stuff. But the emailed ones are complimentary. Should clarify that we have not asked for CEUs for this. We don't have the staffing for that. But in many states, you can take a certificate of attendance and use that toward your CEUs. So we'll send you the certificate, but you're going to have to figure out how to get the CEUs from that if that's what you would like. We have a chat box, so if you have a question either during the session or at the end, go ahead and put a question either in your chat box or in the Q&A box. If you entered in the chat box, I'm the only one who can see it as the host, but I can try to help you in any way possible. And then also we're recording this session, and the recording will be posted on our website within 24 hours. And so you can come back and listen to it again, or if you get interrupted and can't finish the whole thing today, or you want to share it with folks. Again, these recordings are available at no cost to the public. We're a welcome part of our webinar today. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Bob Conley soon, and he will introduce today's topic and today's speakers. And we'll hear from our speakers until the top of the hour. So for about 45 minutes, we have actually 2 case studies today to present as part of our presentation. And the last 15 minutes are going to be devoted to questions and answers and comments from the audience. So during the presentation, if you want to jot down some comments or questions so that at the end of the hour, we can get from you, that'd be great. Right now, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Robert Conley, social worker with 20 years experience at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. It was Bob who served as a project officer for MDS 3.0, and he's been very committed to nursing home care of residents, care of families, care of staff, and also trying to make quality of living in nursing homes as high as possible. So he is a planning committee member, and Frank is the co-leader of the whole webinar project, so I want to thank Bob for that. Bob, would you like to go ahead and introduce our speakers?
Sure. Well, thank you, Merce. We're very excited to have the topic today. It's entitled Advocating with and for Residents with the Long-Term Care Facility and System to Ensure great choice, quality of life, and quality of care. And our distinguished panel members all work with the Ombudsman program or volunteer with the Ombudsman program, and we believe that partnership is so critically important to the social workers and the staffs of nursing homes. So a speaker I've known from some consulting work I did with CMS, and she's an impassioned person about women's rights and advocacy. Becky Kurtz is a lawyer by training. Before she came to government work, she was Georgia State Long-Term Care Ombudsman for 16 years. She served in a variety of positions, including National Association of State Long-Term Care Ombudsmen from 2004 to 2006. She now works as the director of the Office of Long-Term Care Ombudsman Programs within the U.S. Administration on Aging, now called the Administration for Community Living, and she promotes long-term care ombudsman programs that serve our nations. Our speaker is Dianne Brookins, and she also hails from Georgia and actually worked with Becky over the years. She started her work as the director of social work at a 92-bed nursing facility, and now since 1995, when she received her ombudsman certification, coordinating Georgia programs in long-term care ombudsman program. Dianne continues to participate in certificate training and has served on the state committee on the study of long-term care, and has received a certification as an at-risk adult crime tactics specialist in collaboration with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Our third speaker is a social worker by training. Janice has a master's degree in social work from University of Iowa that's focused on aging and end-of-life care. She received that degree after she had had a health problem, a stroke in 1998. Since 2005, she has worked as a volunteer with a local hospice group, and she's actually participated in volunteer long-term care ombudsman training and certification from the Iowa Department on Aging. So I'll turn it over to Becky.
Thanks, Bob, and it's a pleasure to be with you all today. Thanks so much for the invitation to the University of Iowa and to Bob and all of the folks who organized this. What we want to do today is to talk with you all about these objectives, to talk about what the nursing home social service, whether that's a social worker by profession or someone working in the social services department, as an advocate for residents. And what does that mean, both from the social work perspective in terms of how you support residents and their experience and their family relationships, and what opportunities you have in your professional capacity to be an advocate, as well as to talk a little bit about the ombudsman role as an advocate for residents, and then sort of some of the ways that together social workers and long-term care ombudsmen can pursue common goals and understand each other's distinct roles. So my job is to sort of set the foundation for all of that, both at the federal level and the professional level, and then to turn it over to Dianne and Janice to talk more about their experiences working cases at the facility level with individual residents. So my job is to just sort of set the tone at the outset. So when we talk about advocacy, a lot of people mean different things by advocacy. I wanted to make sure we're all sort of the same, have the foundation for that conversation. And at least in the dictionary, advocacy is defined as the act or process of supporting a cause or a proposal, the process of advocating for something, and that means that advocate means support or argue for. So to support a cause or to support a policy or to support a person and their interests. And so within that context, I found it really interesting to look up the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics and find that they actually have the language that's very similar within the Code of Ethics. For those of you who are social workers, in training, part of your code of ethics is your primary responsibility is to promote the well-being of residents and clients. And certainly those clients' interests are primary, and that promoting the well-being is very much in alignment with what advocacy is about. In your promotion of their well-being, you're advocating for their well-being. Interesting that the Code also has a provision specifically around advocating for changes in policy and legislation. So not only thinking of how does my work impact the individual, but how does the social worker's work impact the big picture in a much more broad look at human needs and promotion of social justice. So throughout all of this, I think we'll be talking about advocacy being at every level, right? It could be at the level of the individual interests. It can be at the broader facility-wide level, say, for example, a facility practice, or it could be even at the state or national level if you're talking about policy or laws. Now, when you talk about that level, I know some of you are probably in positions where some limitations on your ability to do that, but certainly in your personal capacity, there are not those limitations as there would be as a professional, and depending on what job is. But I think the fact that we always think of advocacy as both the helping the individual directly and individually, but also thinking about it as the big picture, are sort of the two levels that we talk about throughout this conversation. So I want to also talk to you a little bit at the outset here about the Older Americans Act. That's a federal law that perhaps you are very familiar with, or perhaps not. It actually came about in the 1960s, in 1965, at the same time as Medicare and Medicaid, as part of the war on poverty, to help provide social supports to Americans over age 60 to help support them in their communities and to help protect their rights. And so it created this aging network through state units on aging that every state has. It's probably your Department of Aging or Division of Aging Services or whatever the name is in your state. And there are agencies on aging and the service providers and advocates that are part of that network. We here at the Administration on Aging, which, as Bob said, is now part of a larger organization called the Administration on Community Living, we here at AOA provide grants to states for our core services in the Older Americans Act, and we administer those grants. That's our one of our primary functions. And so examples of those services are things that you probably know very well from your local area: the senior centers, some of the home-delivered meals programs, support for family caregivers, or in the elder rights arena, legal services to elders or long-term care ombudsman programs. Those are examples of some of the core services that are part of the Older Americans Act and that my office is responsible to administer at the federal level. A little bit more about the Ombudsman program structure. My guess is that some of you know this quite well from your work at the facility level, but sometimes it helps to set the framework of exactly how we look, because the long-term care ombudsman program is not the same in every state by any means. And I'm glad to know that we've got a couple of states represented today because they may have very different perspectives on some pieces of this. Although everybody has the same Older Americans Americans Act as the underpinning of their work. So each state has one person who is called the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman. That person may be within the State Unit on Aging or another state agency and be a state employee, and in some states, that individual is an employee of a private not-for-profit agency through a contract with the State Unit on Aging. They're both centralized and decentralized program models. So centralized meaning everyone who serves the resident on a one-on-one basis reports directly to the state ombudsman. Decentralized meaning that there may be contracts between the state agency and area agencies on aging or local nonprofit agencies that then hire staff and train volunteers who work at that local or regional level. Regardless of the structure, centralized or decentralized, regardless of whether the state ombudsman is a state employee or not, the one thing is in every state is the state ombudsman has a responsibility and authority to designate the representatives, whether they be staff or volunteers of the program. And nationally, we have over 1,000 full-time equivalent staff, 8,000, more than 8,000 certified ombudsman volunteers, as well as some other volunteers who do additional duties. So it's a lot until you see how many nursing home, assisted living, board and care residents there are to serve, and you realize that the demand keeps us long-term care ombudsman program very busy responding to the needs of residents. One thing I wanted to mention is that in the long-term care ombudsman program, there are many other kinds of ombudsman or sometimes called ombuds programs. They might be in universities or they might be in corporations or in government entities. There are lots of different things for ombuds programs, but they all have in common the concept that they are a safe place to bring concerns and to seek resolution of problems. And so created the Long-Term Care Ombudsman program within the Older Americans Act specifically as a safe place for residents who live in long-term care facilities, whether that's a nursing home, assisted living, board and care, to bring their concerns to an independent entity that can then impartially look at what's going on, investigate the matter, work towards resolution, and do so in a confidential manner. And those are essential characteristics of any kind of ombudsman program, not only the long-term care ombudsman program that we're talking about today. Sorry, challenge with my clicker. There we go. So when we do talk about the Ombudsman Program for Long-Term Care, however, there are a few provisions in the Older Americans Act that I wanted to focus on as primary functions of this program. And those are to identify, investigate, and resolve complaints that are either made by residents or on behalf of residents of long-term care facilities. Those complaints might relate to providers, they might relate to public agencies, or to health and social service agencies. So it's not always a complaint related to the facility that you may work in. It may also be about, for example, the ability of the resident to access health care benefits, their Medicare benefits, for example, or to access their Social Security benefits appropriately, or to deal with other kinds of issues that may not be directly about the facility activities. Also represent the interests of residents before governmental agencies and seek remedies to protect residents' health, safety, welfare, and rights. And this gets to the big picture when we were talking about advocacy, but being both individual as well as bigger picture, broader picture, policy kinds of things. Ombudsmen have a responsibility to monitor the development of and implementation of government policies and actions as they relate to long-term care facility residents, and to make recommendations for changes in those policies. So it's a pretty big and broad mandate that ombudsmen have. You also, as social workers, have big, broad mandates, and federal law that sets forth the standards for nursing homes talk about specifically what the social services requirements are, and that the nursing facility must provide medically related social services to obtain or maintain the highest practicable physical, mental, and psychosocial well-being of each resident. My guess is that you have heard this many times. We look at what does that mean in terms of the guidance to surveyors, and how does that look in terms of your work on a day-to-day basis. We see that the federal government expects that you will either directly or through a facility referral to a resource look at residents might lack an effective family system or an effective support system, responding to residents when they have behavioral symptoms, including resident-to-resident conflicts. We see the presence of disability, whether that be medical or psychological, response to depression, response to chronic or acute pain, difficulty with personal interaction and socialization skills on behalf of residents. So lots of different responsibilities that the social services role is given by CMS. And so it doesn't end. There's more. Certainly things like the presence of legal or financial problems, abuse of alcohol or other drugs, inability to cope with the loss of function, need for emotional support, changes in family relationships or living arrangements. I'm thinking here of situations like transfers to a different setting, or even room changes in a facility can be pretty significant changes, as well as the ability of the resident to function or change in their condition, or use of a physical or chemical restraint, grief loss issues, engagement in meaningful activities. All of those are things that CMS has said we expect social services to be there as a support for the resident. So I'm going to turn over to Dianne, but I just want to say at the outset here that we realize as Ombudsman that you all social workers have a really big responsibility to meet all of these needs for all the residents in your facility, and I know in addition to all of those expectations that I've just mentioned, you'll have all those responsibilities that are sometimes called other duties assigned, that are plenty of other responsibilities that fill your day. Hoping that today we'll have the chance to talk about examples from the perspective of the staff and the volunteer ombudsman work and their work with you all, with residents, and with facilities that help inform and strengthen the relationship between long-term care ombudsman and social workers. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our other speakers to talk through some opportunities and some case examples. And I'll come back to me at the end to wrap up with some concluding remarks later. Thanks.
Becky, this is Dianne Brookins, and I'm so fortunate to be able to speak with all of you today in my work and the advocacy opportunities for social workers. The first thing when the resident is admitted to a nursing home, you as the social worker, director of social services, are the first advocate that the resident will have. You will be able to help that resident in adjusting. The information that you gather can really make a lot of difference in the quality of life throughout that resident's stay in the nursing home. Your participation in the assessments at the MDS and Section Q, dealing with whatever that resident, their grief, their loss, this may be having a hard time adjusting, and you are going to be the very first advocate that they will see. you may have to learn a whole lot about the family dynamics and be the one that intercedes with the resident with how they're adjusting to the placement. And life changes are difficult, especially when you have lived your life in the same place for a long time, and now you're moving from a 6-room house into a half-a-room space in a nursing home. You also will have that opportunity for the transition planning. And now one of the greatest things that has come to I'm going to say, is that just because you were admitted to a nursing home does not mean you're going to be there forever. There are opportunities to return back to other personal settings. So as an advocate throughout that resident stay, is going to probably learn your name, and you are going to be contacted over and over again with that resident who is trying to find themselves and throughout their stay in the nursing home. The patient in the assessment, I can ask you to change the slide. I'm so sorry. The workers as the link in the community resources, you will have the ability to learn all from the resident in your interviews and your daily action. Sometimes you will be seeing them on a daily basis, sometimes a weekly basis, and sometimes more than you really want to if they do learn your name. But you have all of the resources available and relationships they will need if they are planning to go back into that community. The faith-based community, in public housing, in-home service providers, if they're going to be able to go back into the living arrangement with a family or in their own home with help coming in. Now, please. The third opportunity, the relationship between the social worker and the ombudsman. Ombudsman can oftentimes be the social worker's best friend. Most ombudsmen have a social work background of some type, but the thing that they can do is offer some assistance when the resident does have difficulty in the adjustment. The ombudsman is going to visit with the resident. The ombudsman cannot give up the information shared in confidence with the resident, but the social worker has the ability to tell the ombudsman what might be going on with that resident. The ombudsman has the ability to be the social worker's, and I guess I'm going to say that, and there's probably ombudsmen saying to me, "Oh dear, we're not going to be their ombudsman." But many times when the relationship that the social worker has with the resident not be what facility has often wanted, because you do have other duties every day and you can't spend all of your time with the residents in your building. But the ombudsman can help you with finding a way to make sure that the resident gets what they need and you maintain the credibility as the social worker for the facility that you work in. The professional relationship with the ombudsman and the social worker should be one that is an understanding of what my job is and you know what your job is, and I would never ask you to violate anything that is a violation of what your work is. So the social worker and the ombudsman have a lot of ability to improve the quality of life and the quality of care for the residents in the facilities. I hope that this has been helpful to you, and I'm going to turn it back over now to Janice.
Thank you, Dianne. I volunteer ombudsman. And the state of Iowa used to have what was called the Resident Advocacy Committee Group, and that was defunded, and is a program that was really put in place to the actual staff ombudsman. We have local ombudsmen, actually employees of the state office of ombudsman, but I'm a volunteer, and I want to say that what Dianne said as far as the help that you can get from your local ombudsman, if you have residents that may be more needy, that seem to constantly have questions or needs, you might be able to ask your ombudsman to help out and visiting with the person, and might help your more. That would free you up to do what you need to do, and you can still help the resident with concerns they have. I have spent most of my time doing, I think, is a lot of it has to do with communication issues. And I guess we could go on to the case study I have to present, which the facilities I was in had a 45-year-old female who asked a nurse to contact her doctor regarding a medical issue. And the resident felt that she was being ignored by the nurse, and she was getting very frustrated. And the facility itself had a history of communication problems between the staff and residents. The administration did not set a culture of taking resident concerns seriously. In this environment, the social services staff were not encouraged nor sanctioned to advocate for resident rights. And in that situation, the help of the ombudsman was an excellent intervention, and so I hope you can keep in mind that is a resource for you. So, in a particular case, a resident agreed that she would meet with the person who was a nurse and the ombudsman to discuss the situation that she felt was being ignored. And it was helpful because the nurse was able to explain why she shouldn't be the resident. In fact, she was the resident had made a request at the change of shift, and of course that is a difficult time because you can't get the staff member doesn't have enough time to follow through on the request, and so after ending and a request that perhaps the resident could make her requests earlier in the day that would allow the staff members to take care of the issue or concern. And so that was agreed to by all. The resident felt much better about it. She felt that she took it seriously and agreed that she would make her requests earlier during the day. So that was an example of how the ombudsman might assist services. For that opportunity to present that.
Yes.
Hi, and now
Hi, I have lost you on my screen. Okay, we're back. Let's go into the case study number 2, and this is Dianne again. Is a case around a resident who was admitted to the nursing home by her husband, and after the first 3 days, he no longer was willing to for her the Medicaid or pay any of she came in as under Medicare Part A, so she had the first 20 days there. And the nursing home administrator called the Ombudsman office and said, we have a problem and we really just don't know what to do with it. And then when he told us what it was, we suggested that he was going to have help from someone other than the Ombudsman. So here we are. The resident who was unable to communicate in any kind of way due to a dementia of the Alzheimer's type was receiving total care in the facility for everything. The issued the 30-day notice for involuntary discharge for non-payment, and you can see in the slide it says a $31,000 in arrears. The husband obtained a divorce from the little resident who had not a clue that anything was going on, and the husband suggested to the facility that they make a referral to the Adult Protective Services related to possibility of financial exploitation because the husband would not complete the Medicaid application and was some free and other resources available that he was trying to shield from his wife. The social worker had no contact with any other family members, and this was second marriage for the resident, and she was a considerable amount older than her husband. So the APS referral was made. The nurse then received a letter from an attorney from ex-husband relinquishing all responsibilities for the care. And could we go to the next slide? Now we've got the 30-day notice for discharge in effect. The local ombudsman went up to visit with the resident, which that is the responsibility of an ombudsman before any action can be taken on behalf of a resident, regardless of their ability to communicate. The ombudsman has to make that visit to make sure that the resident is or is incapacitated, and then the permission of the state ombudsman to act on that behalf can be gained. So the community ombudsman visited with the resident, saw the condition, made the referral to a Georgia Legal Services program, and the attorneys with the legal aid were so gracious and started immediately to work with the resident and to assist her to get the benefits that she needed. The Adult Protective Services, because there was no active family available, there was no one to speak on this resident's behalf, obtained through the state of Georgia a temporary guardianship, and it's not something that they do frequently, but became the legal guardian, the permanent guardian. The nursing home agreed not to do any discharge of any kind and keep the lady in the home until all of the legal action was resolved. And then the nursing home social worker was able to wonderful opportunity for the lady, and Georgia has and I don't believe that Second Wind Dreams comes around to other states. It may be in a southern region, but it is a private nonprofit where people who live in nursing homes that have a need can be presented. And with this lady, Second Wind Dreams, new clothing, all of the articles that this lady would need for her stay in the nursing home, and she continues to live at the nursing home, and the ombudsman visits on a monthly basis, and there still remains a communication with the nursing home and the social worker and the administration there. So it was a tragedy that had a successful end.
So it comes back to me. This is Becky. And I I hope that during our question and answer time, you will have an opportunity to, in the context of those cases or even other cases that you've experienced, some perspectives you have and some dialogue on these issues. But thanks to both Janice and Dianne for sharing some of their experiences working with nursing home social workers. There were a couple different points that I heard in these cases, and I wanted to just sort of summarize those for you, and then ask a question for you all to ponder. First, I wanted to talk about something I heard in terms of the power that the social worker has. And I think sometimes we don't think of social services as, it's not the administrator, it's not the director of nursing, and sometimes we don't think of the social worker as so powerful, but when it comes to the individual resident and their families, the amazing ability of the social worker to influence the experience of that resident in that facility and to problem solve and advocate for those residents, I think came through in some of these examples and some of the comments that were made. You will have the ability to make a huge difference for in the lives of long-term care residents. A second point that I heard through the case examples was that while these examples came from the perspective of long-term care ombudsman programs, it wasn't about doing the work of the social worker for them, not a substitute for social worker, but as an outside entity that might be able to resolve problems that have not yet been resolved within the facility. So, for example, the communications issue that sometimes most facilities are able to resolve, but sometimes having someone from the outside come in and say, we really need to think through this problem to enhance the communications all around between staff and residents, or thinking about what are the resources that need to be brought to bear and brainstorming with the nursing home social worker about who's out there, who are the other agencies that we can tap, whether it be legal services or adult protective services or a nonprofit that could provide some provide for some needs of the resident. What are the things we can tap into in the community together that the long-term care ombudsman and the social worker can tap into to support residents? So there are a few of the themes I heard through that discussion. I would really be interested in hearing from those of you on the phone, and I think all of us would, not only your questions or comments about the case examples, or if you have questions or comments about any of the other material we've presented, but it would also be helpful to hear examples of your perspectives on when you have been able to be an effective advocate, and not being afraid to toot your own horn a little bit, and let us know when you feel that your position has allowed you to successfully advocate for the interests of a resident, or what some of those barriers or challenges have been that you've found that you want to be an advocate for the resident, but you've found something that's created a problem in your being able to really promote the resident interests, whether that be at the facility level or at the individual level. And also, if any of you have examples that you'd like to add where you've used the Ombudsman program as a partner to help promote the interests of residents, I think those are all the kinds of questions and discussion that we might find really helpful in this dialogue today. So I'm going to turn it back over to Merce and Bob to kind of lead us through the question and answer discussion.
Thank you, Becky. So all our panel members are unmuted, so you can join at any point that you would like. If you are listening through your computer, please use the chat box and send us your ideas and questions through the chat box. And so we have a question right now from Lori, and this is what Lori says. I'm interested to hear other social workers walk the line of advocating for the resident and their rights while also adhering the policies and procedures of the nursing facility. Example, room changes. We're faced with the facility wanting to make room changes for residents to meet our needs while the resident of the family doesn't want to change the room. I think room changes is hitting it on the head. There's very different perspectives on what's going on with those. Any response or reaction from our panelists about advice to this social worker on how to advocate for the resident but also recognize the needs of the facility?
This is Dianne, and I just had this situation just a couple of weeks back. And the first thing that we understand the needs that facilities have. However, you cannot. The resident has the right to remain in the place where they have been, and that it's their home. Under the resident's rights, it's their home, and the facility is prohibited for making room changes for their own convenience. Now, a lot of times, the social worker is the one that is told, you got to make a change. We want everybody moved. We're changing, doing one room change because there's a resident-to-resident issue, or there's someone that the family members object to someone being in a room and they want to have the other party moved away. The Ombudsman can certainly help you figure that out. But the first thing you need to know is the resident has the right to remain and in what has been their home structure. And that's that facilities are prohibited from making room changes for their own benefit.
I have a comment to add to that, but I want to first see if Janice has anything she wants to add.
Well, I'm going to say that in a case like that where it's a facility policy, it may be something that could be addressed through state policy issues. I don't know. So this is where the advocacy goes to sort of a higher level than dealing strictly with the residents. So I don't know exactly what allows the the facility to think that they can make these changes without understanding that the resident is allowed to stay in the room, as Dianne pointed out. So perhaps it's something that could be at a higher level, but Becky probably have something very good to say about this.
I did have something I wanted to add, so thank you.
Please do.
First of all, I want to thank the participant for the question, because I think this is a really good example of that tension that I think social workers often find themselves in between the facility policy or the facility practice and sort of the decision for a broad group of residents versus what the individual resident priorities are and helping to meet that individual resident's goal. And I think social workers probably more than anyone get stuck in the middle of those. What I wanted to say is that amend that you work in your state, because I don't know which state this participant is from, of course, but I recommend that you work in your state with the Ombudsman on getting some information about your state requirements, because there are some distinctions, as Janice mentioned, there are some distinctions in states around this, particularly around, for example, I know when I was in Georgia, there was a state rule, which is different than the federal rule, about requiring a minimum of 15 days notice before any transfers between rooms happened. Well, your state law may or may not say that. It may say something totally different. And there may be state laws around the reasons, appropriate reasons for changes in room. So I would look at both your surveyor guidance that's going to be from CMS, which applies everywhere, as well as your state law. again, I think the Ombudsman program can be a real good resource, even if you just want to ask the question and not talk about the problem of this particular resident, but to say, help me think through what are resident rights in this state related to intra-facility room changes. Let's make sure you're on solid ground so you know exactly what the resident rights are. And then, as a next step, once you are clear on what the resident rights are, whether they can refuse the change or whether they can demand adequate notice, the issue of helping facilitate the transition. If it's determined that the transition is going to happen and not just be refused, which in certain circumstances refusal may be the best solution, but if the transition is going to happen, how can you help that resident with that transition? Whether that transition was within a facility or moving out of a facility, that whole process of getting ready for the transition, of preparing for it without it being abrupt and getting used to the idea of the transition and knowing when it's going to happen and not just having your stuff moved around so that that the resident feels an object is so important. So the resident can participate in the conversation and can participate in the transition planning is absolutely critical. I think it gets back to the whole concept of person-centered planning. Resident, what is it that's important to you, and how can we help you get your goals met here? And making it so that it's not about moving things and moving a person. I try to even keep away from language like placement, because it sounds like you're playing an object. You know, how do you help the individual with their choices of where they're going to live? And if they don't like all of their choices, how do you help them with the goals that they do have to make that at least less bad, if not everything that they want? But I know it wasn't the perfect answer, but I do think you're going to have to look at a few things about your state requirements as well as the federal requirements related to intra-facility transfers, but also I think the process and the communication in that process is absolutely critical, and you, the social worker, can play a big role in that.
Thank you much for responses, Dianne and Janice and Becky. It's also the case that sometimes the other people who work in the nursing home are not that familiar with the state laws, especially if they have transferred from working in a nursing home in a different state. Many large cities have, bigger state lines. And so part of what the social worker can also do is track down those state laws and make them available, and during staff meetings and things like that, just make sure everybody is up to date on what's allowed, and then also thinking about things through the lens of what's in this resident's best interest, because what's in the resident's best interest in the long run is what's in the facility's best interest. We have another question from Evelyn, and I'll read it now. It says, we work well with our long-term care ombudsman. Appreciate their presence in our facility. We have always followed the practice of not accepting admittance of some inquiries that we feel that we cannot honestly accommodate that resident's specific needs. We have a new CEO who wants us to put in writing our admission packet that we cannot take bariatric residents or residents with behaviors or who have a possibility of declining to the point of needing one-on-one care. I'm wondering, though, is this a form of discrimination when we write this out? Well, go ahead, Becky.
Well, I just wanted to make sure I heard the question thoroughly. So the concern is about writing it out?
That's the concern. We have a new CEO that wants us to put in writing in the admissions packet that we do not take bariatric residents or residents with behaviors or residents who have a possibility of declining to the point of needing one-on-one care. And I guess it's putting in writing these specific situations, is putting in writing a form of discrimination. We'll say it is actually having these practices a form of discrimination.
Yeah, that's the piece that I wanted to comment on first. You sort of thought of my question there, Merce, because I think whether it's in writing or not, practice of that, of denying admission based on a particular disability, at a minimum, raises questions. And there's two federal laws off the top of my head I can think of that could come into play here. One is the American with Disabilities Act, and the other being the Fair Housing Act. And so the practice of that, whether it's in writing or not, might raise some questions. So I think that the raises a pretty important question here. Behaviors, bariatric care, and the possibility of declining to be heavy care, I think, were the situations. I think that what's interesting about putting it in your admissions agreement or in the admissions packet or the information that's in writing is that it's easier for the resident and a representative of the resident to challenge it. Most facilities don't put it in writing, even if they do make these kinds of decisions, because they want it to be harder to prove. So I think it's fascinating that it might go in a written document, but I don't know that it changes the discriminatory nature of it. Complaints can be made by individuals who apply to a nursing facility, to the Office of Civil Rights for Fair Housing violations, Fair Housing Act violations, and there may be some entities at the state level as well that take those Fair Housing Act violation complaints, and those ADA complaints are also handled by Office of Civil Rights. So you might get some complaints on that if a resident decides that they want to enter the facility and are refused based solely on the disability that they have or the disability that they might acquire. What's interesting on that last one is that it gets into the issue of would the facility have the right to discharge someone if they developed that disability. And my thinking is the federal regulations are not going to permit that unless the facility is able to show that it truly cannot meet the needs of the residents and that's not a nursing home level of care. Also, I'm going to let others respond to this, but I also had a citation I found on the earlier question about facility room transfers, but I want to not cut off the conversation on this discrimination question first, if Janice or Dianne wanted to add anything.
Janice, I think I would like to say that I think, Becky, what you commented on last is, can the facility actually take care of conditions? You certainly can't quality of life to a resident if you're unable to address the issues that they have. And I think that dementia is always a big, consideration in nursing homes, and I think that there are state rules that where if a person becomes difficult because of dementia, where they're wandering and things like that, facilities do have to be able to accommodate that by either locking areas. So I think maybe that would be a state issue again that needs to be looked at as federal guidelines.
There were a few people who wrote in and said, I understand the question, but kind of what Janice is getting at, but what if the nursing home doesn't have the equipment to care for certain kinds of disabilities? Then you're putting you put the potential at a safety risk. That's what it is. I'm not exactly sure that's what it meant. So the whole issue about if the nursing home can't meet the needs, and part of that though may be, should the nursing home be expected to meet the needs? So everybody knows nursing home care is not one-on-one care; it is group care. But I'm not sure that you'd be able to identify somebody who may potentially need, one-on-one care in 2 months or 2 years.
Right. So a couple of comments on that. This is Becky. One of the things is that what the Fair Housing Act requires is that the facility, or housing is, but in this case we're talking about nursing facility, look at whether there's an ability to reasonably accommodate the individual. For example, if the facility needs to purchase equipment and the equipment is to enable them to provide care for that individual, it is possible that that could be considered a reasonable accommodation for the individual. Now, there's going to be the whole term reasonable. So, there's some equipment that's going to be so expensive that it might be that the Fair Housing Act, the folks, if there's a dispute, will decide it's beyond reasonable. But in many cases, if equipment is not going to be incredibly extremely expensive, there's going to be an opportunity to reasonably accommodate the needs of that individual, and I think facilities would often lose those cases if they were challenged on the equipment piece. Now, there's some equipment that I think you're going to be pretty clear on. For example, I know some states have only certified facilities to provide ventilator care for ventilator-dependent folks if they have special advanced certification. So that's going to, sometimes it's going to be very expensive, very specialized equipment that needs specialized people to operate it. And I don't think that in those cases there's going to be a problem for that resident who needs vent care and in a facility that doesn't provide vent care. That's probably not going to be seen as discrimination. But there's an awful lot of things that are going to be considered reasonable accommodation that wouldn't be very expensive equipment with trained staff to be able to support. The thing that Janice mentioned about dementia care, of course, a huge proportion of people who live in our nation's nursing homes have dementia. And so I think that the expectation is that while how dementia plays out in individuals can be very different, there's an expectation that facilities be trained on and know how to meet the needs of individuals who have severe dementia, because that is common. That's what nursing homes do in many cases. So it's sometimes complex. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think it's an expectation that that's a service nursing homes provide and for which they are reimbursed by Medicare and Medicaid.
The person's declining, residents declining in the future, there's hospice. And there are other options, too, other resources that the nursing home could help the resident and family tap in order to care for the person. So I guess that of the three situations offered, the bariatric resident, a resident with behaviors, or the possibility of declining, the one is new to me, that somebody might not be admitted because of the possibility of declining to needing a lot more care. That's really interesting. The other issue to me, the residents with behaviors, sometimes it's the interaction or the social environment that set residents up for behaviors, the behavioral reactions to the social environment. So sometimes we need to be doing all we can to change the social environment so that we don't provoke behaviors in some residents. So I'd be really interested in knowing if this is not only a new CEO to that nursing facility, but a new CEO in general, because some of these behaviors are quite typical within nursing home residents. Bob, are you going to say something?
Yeah, I guess the thing that I was thinking about, because I had been a hospital social worker for about 14 years, is when you can sometimes be the social worker in the middle, that administrator is paying your bill and is to set policy, and yet you in reality know that to not to put put something like that in writing, it does appear to be not in the best interest, and that internally sometimes that might be difficult unless you have an ethics committee or something in the nursing home to solve, and that the Ombudsman is really an external source to look at that. And if the assumptions are correct, options would the Ombudsman have? One of them would be to see if they could resolve it and kind of say, as maybe Becky did, that in a lot of dementia, this is normal care and wouldn't be if it's the situation where someone wrote that the person's particular disability is beyond staffing and beyond the care management, and as Janice said, there'd be some danger. Then go to the fair housing and to the legal side, or is that something that the Ombudsman could write something up and allow that facility either move the patient or keep the patient?
Becky, I'm sure that I 100% understand your question, Bob. So if my response is not responsive, let me know if I've missed something. But it's going to approach this based on what the resident says, or if the resident can't express it, does the resident have a representative on their behalf? What do they say their goals are? Ombudsman is going to approach this based on how can we help that resident meet their goal? Is their goal to stay? Is their goal to leave? Is their goal to move to a different room? What is their goal? And if the resident's goal is, let's say, for example, it's this admission issue, it's a potential resident, and the resident says, this is the best nursing home for me, this is where I want to be, then the Ombudsman's going to say, okay, resident, let's try to figure out how we can help that happen for you. If it's a situation where the resident is already in the facility and the facility is saying, we're going to have to transfer or discharge you because we don't have the ability to meet your needs, and the resident says, but I really think you need to continue to meet my needs here, the Ombudsman is going to work with the resident and look at strategies for meeting those goals. The strategies that the Ombudsman use are going to depend based on what the resident wants, both in terms of the resident's goal and in terms of the resident's preference of strategy. So it's not like Ombudsman have this, if this, then this kind of flow chart. It's rather, is the resident comfortable with this approach? One resident may be like, can you refer me to legal services because I would like to file a formal complaint legally against this nursing home because they're discriminating against me. Another resident's perspective may be, I would like to work this out in a collaborative way. I have to live here. I want to live here. I want to get along with everybody. I want this to be a collaborative approach. Another resident may say, is there you could come and support me in my care plan meeting so we could think about whether they're doing everything and have thought of everything that I need to have my needs met. So the strategy that an Ombudsman uses is not always that predictable because the comfort level of the resident with different strategies isn't always the same. I don't know if I've addressed, though, Bob, what your core question was.
I think I have. I guess the issue that someone is saying in the facility they can't manage it and the resident wants to stay there. I guess if there's a blank wall there, does that then go to the civil rights or others, or is it always able to be resolved with just the Ombudsman and
and sometimes it takes a combination of both. One of the things that I wanted to point out, I'm very interested in because it has happened to me in the past, if you are a skilled facility, and I understand the ventilators, we have that's one of the, that's an issue that every nursing home does not have the ventilator possibility or does not have ventilator accommodations for residents. But skilled facilities are skilled facilities. And what is the skill that you're saying that you can't meet for this resident? So the assessment of what they are saying, we can't take care of you, we can't meet your need. Is it you need to train your staff to be with what the resident needs are? Or are they just saying that because we have someone that does have a behavioral problem and it takes too much time? But a skilled facility is a skilled facility. So I think the Ombudsman working with the resident and the facility to come to ways to take, you may not always have to have the appeal of it. There is a possibility of working through it.
Thanks.
I think that's more often, this is Becky, I think that's more often the norm. I think most of the time the cases are solved informally and don't have to be handled through an appeal or through a referral to licensing and certification, or in the vast majority of ombudsman cases, they are resolved to the satisfaction of the resident without having to get referred to other entities. But ultimately, those options are available in many cases, so I think that's why we mentioned them, not as a first way to go, but as a last resort if it can't be handled informally. But most facilities, most folks in facilities want to do the right thing, and they're just trying to figure out how to do it. And I think to the extent that Ombudsman can help them think through things they might not have thought of otherwise, or brainstorm with them, or be ask questions they might not have thought about, or connect them up with resources they haven't thought about, I think that's an ideal way for facilities to reach out to Ombudsman.
Facility also sometimes is in the position where they need to protect the safety of the other residents, and so if it comes to the case that one resident is truly presenting a danger to other residents, then that kind of a situation can be touchy as well, because the facility is responsible for the safety of all the residents.
I just wanted to make one comment. I thought the initial question was about people who aren't even in the facility yet, but the admission packet. Stating this kind of stuff, of trying to ward off possible problems. I don't know that. I think that a lot of what we've been saying seems to relate to people who may be in facility already and who are coming up with stuff like involuntary discharge or transfers.
You're right, Janice, because the question did come in whether or not it's
in writing, yeah,
to put in the admissions packet. So if I suppose, so people self-select to not be admitted there or to not be in there.
Right. Perhaps they could consult with the Ombudsman if they're unaware of facilities that may have accommodations for these people who don't fit their criteria.
I think the facility does need to be very cautious because the Housing Act, for example, deals with admissions as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there has to be ability to provide reasonable accommodation for housing of individuals with a variety of disabilities, as long as reasonable accommodation can be made.
Okay. That's a clarification.
For that. And Becky, you mentioned that you had looked up some information on the previous question. Would you like to share that information with us?
I sure would if I can still find it. No, yes. So it's interesting what the federal the guidelines say about transfer and discharge, because in Code of Federal Regulations in 42 CFR, I'm going to say the section in case anybody wants to jot down, 483.12a, it says transfer and discharge includes movement of a resident to bed outside of the facility, whether that bed is in the same physical plant or not. It does not refer to movement of a resident to a bed within the same facility. So there are some requirements if you're in a state that has a distinct part between Medicare and Medicaid. But unless your state has some provisions about transfers inside a facility, which some states do have resident rights about transfers within a facility. But if your state doesn't have state rights on that, you're really dealing less with a rights issue and more with how we help accommodate the transition needs of this individual. So that's I wanted to say was that that's very state specific. And so when you're talking back to that question about facility transfers within a facility, it may not be a rights question if it's not a right in your state. Having said that, as a worker, you can certainly point out the importance of a smooth and orderly transition and supporting the resident involvement to maximum extent possible in fulfilling their goals and their needs, and in make sure that people aren't treated like objects. They're not moved around like furniture. Person, how do we help meet this person's needs and make a smooth transition? And in every state, regardless of rights.
And bring up a good point, and something that goes back to how you started our webinar this afternoon, and that is, if you're a practicing nursing home social worker and you see that your state laws are not in the best interest of the residents, then bring some ideas for change to your local NHSW chapter or to your local school of social work. Or Becky, do you know, is there any organization that's keeping like model state legislation for nursing home resident care, to get ideas about how other states may have worded certain kind of policies that would be more resident friendly?
The recommendation I would have is to either contact with your ombudsman and even the Office of the State Ombudsman that often works on the policy level. But there's also an organization called the National Consumer Voice for Quality Long-Term Care, and they work at the federal as well as the multi-state level on nursing home quality issues, and they might be able to answer questions like, who has the best examples of residents' rights around transfers within a facility from bedroom to bedroom, or who has the best appeal rights language in their state laws. They might be able to help with that kind of analysis.
Excellent.
And their website is theconsumervoice.org.
Wonderful. We will put a link to that to their website from our website. Time has evaporated. I want to thank Becky, Dianne, Janice, Bob, and Lori for questions, Evelyn for questions. Those of you who submitted your comments, thank you so much for participating in today's session, and we will post the recording within 24 hours. Burn out. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.